And I'm also Samsung because I'm trying to cast to our TV, so I'm the other Samsung down here.
I'm Alan Nazaro and I work for RCAC, and I've been working with the collaborative, the Campfire Collaborative, for almost 2 years now, and also working on the Distressed Communities Technical Assistance Team for Paradise through a HUD grant. And we just recently helped the town apply for a grant to do some resiliency planning. So if that grant comes through, Meredith, we could be working together.
I sure hope so. That sounds great. All right, I don't think we made it to everyone, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna get us started here. Share screen so you can follow along with the questions.
So it's got to be fairly cool, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you all see the slide now? Hopefully that's a yes. Okay, great. So what do you think about increasing the density of housing along Skyway and Clark for when the sewer system comes in? And think about it in terms of a 3-story building on those corridors. And just interested if you have any concerns or that sounds like a good idea. The thinking being those trees.
A 3-story building?
Yeah.
Wow.
Who is that? I hear some surprise. Tell me more about that.
Well, I'm kind of surprised because it was, do we have any 3-story buildings even in Chico? That seems like a big step towards getting a little too dense, in my opinion.
I think there's a lot of dormitories in Chico State that are 3 or more stories. I would have no problem with 3 stories along the Skyway corridor and Clark, as long as they were following some type of a building code and not, some type of architectural controls so they don't look like trash. We want them to look nice.
I mean, I've seen a lot of the buildings down in Chico. I mean, if you drive down Nord and 32, or, there's a lot of 3-story apartments on that street, and it's pretty ugly. I have a hesitation with the 3-story buildings personally.
Do you think that's, is it the height or is it architecture or color? You think it is related to the height of those?
I think it's the density. I mean, it's just, there's one right next to another, right next to another, right next to another. And it kind of doesn't have the feel of Paradise.
Any other thoughts on this? And maybe it's a matter of just having more space between buildings to try to maintain some yards a little bit.
Well, I think as long as the aesthetics are done properly, they could work, but I would prefer to see the 2 stories that we've had in the past.
They have some nice 2-story apartments that are nicely landscaped on Elliott between, I think it's Copeland and Sawmill. I mean, they have them landscaped nicely. They're spread out. And if they look sort of like that, not just, I think what I'm against is a road front apartment, just road front without any landscaping break. If they look, I mean, I wouldn't mind if they put a 3rd story on these. I can't remember the name of the complex over here, but I mean, they look fine. If they wanted to go 1 more story, they really do look pretty good. It's just that kind of utilitarian block look that would not be suiting.
Meredith, do you have the map for the sewer area?
Not in this presentation, but let me put in the chat the website where you could find that picture.
I think we're all pretty aware of the map, following Skyway, Clark, and Pearson.
Pearson.
And I would agree with the other speakers previously that it's architectural control and spacing. So you don't get like one Army unit after another down the Skyway. That would be the important thing.
The only thing to keep in mind and is that, if mitigation against wildfires requires more open space and more buffer areas, then, you're going to have some areas where there's going to be a little more dense development in order to accommodate the number of people that you hope to come back. Right now there's only maybe 20% of the previous population in town. So if there has to be room taken up for buffer areas and open space, then some areas along those main corridors might have to be a little more dense.
But why does the density of the buildings have to be more dense if we're allowing for more open space? I realize you want to have some parks and things like that, but why not build the open space into the building space?
Well, I'm just saying that a good portion of the open space might be on the perimeter of the town as a safety measure against fire coming in to the town. So it's going to leave less developable space within the town. And it's just the idea that there may be some places in town that are unbuildable because they're too much at risk.
This is actually a great transition into our next question, which is about wildfire buffers and policies. So we heard in the long-term recovery and analysis that Zeke and other experts have done that parks and green belts are a great fire break. And so that's one thing to consider. We've also looked at kind of a stick approach as opposed to a carrot, is if someone is building in those periphery parcels that have the highest risk, there's a certain development impact fee levied on those. So a fee that would only apply in that situation that could then go to helping create more evacuation routes or other resiliency measures. We could also look at increased setbacks for fire safe materials, or the low hanging fruit kind of is just trying to facilitate more home hardening and vegetation management. So interested in reactions to those, especially at the parks and green belts. And we have Zeke here too to help us through this.
Well, think that all of them sound like they would be helpful. The development impact fee would depend on how much that's going to be. And what about homes that have already been rebuilt as far as, setbacks and fire safe materials? I think we already pretty much were required to use fire safe materials almost from the beginning of rebuilding. But I would love to see programs to facilitate vegetation management if that meant it was going to help the homeowners with being able to remove that vegetation. I'm one of those disabled people, and it's really hard for me to get out there, and there's so many more weeds now than there ever were before the fire. All this new stuff's weeds I've never seen before, and a lot of that's really hard to handle when you're just a single person without a lot of income and having disabilities.
That's great feedback. Thank you.
I totally support the parks and green belts as buffers. I live at the very, very eastern end of Billy, beyond east of Pence. Probably if I was a good golfer, I could hit a driver into the Feather River Canyon. We're that close. And so a lot of that has been removed. A lot of the dead wood has been removed. And I would love to see much of the Feather River Canyon western edge be purchased by the town, the state, the county, or the feds to provide a greenbelt buffer that was maintained in perpetuity to protect us from fires coming across that canyon.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else want to weigh in on these?
I was just gonna say, I mean, the only one I have a slight reservation with is the development impact fee. Again, I just would hesitate, I don't want people to, there's a lot of fees already associated with building, and I would, if, depending on what that is, I don't want it, I would hate it to prevent somebody from building on their land if it, if it's too much. I mean, again, I'm not knowing enough about it. That's just my first reaction. So, but agreed, like Vicky said, I mean, we did have to have siding that was fire safe when our landscaping is all kind of, we're trying to, help out with what's going to be fire safe. But I love the programs too that would help with the vegetation. I think that's a great idea.
Has anyone seen an increase in their homeowner's insurance?
Oh, yes. Mine went up 30% from, what was it, about $3,200 to $4,600.
Wow. Mine has been pretty consistent. It was about 1,200 before the fire, and I think it's maybe up to 1,350, 1,400 now.
But let me say, I never take a rate increase laying down, so I contacted 10 insurance companies from all of the majors, minors, and independent insurance companies. And I found out of 10, only one other company would even agree to insure my house in this zip code.
Yeah,
They were more than what I'm already paying. So
right.
we are in a very bad situation on homeowners insurance with fire protection.
Yeah, that's what we found out, and part of this plan that we're going to be working on, if we get the grant, is to figure out which of these kinds of mitigation factors will have an impact on insurance companies, to have them come back into the market, and B, to make them have more reasonable fees if we can get some mitigation methods that are going to satisfy the insurance companies that the town is safer.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. So do you know for a fact that any major insurance company like Allstate or State Farm will reduce their rates if X, Y, and Z mitigation is put in place? Because everybody I talked to said, no, your history is bad and we can't change our history. So will they take into effect the future, or is it just history?
Well, no, it's the future based on which kinds of mitigations we can do that will affect the risk factor. And no one has done a study of that specifically. We've on our team are a bunch of actuaries and insurance risk modelers and insurance reinsurance companies and people that know that industry inside out. So we're going to try to come up with a cost benefit analysis, if you will, of which mitigation projects that the town can implement, and people hardening their homes and other things like that. The combination of all that would satisfy the insurance companies that the town has been made enough safer to where they will, act normal again, or semi-normal.
Well, I'm pretty sure that most of us are a lot more fire safe now than we were 3 years ago. There's hardly any trees left in most areas, and the few that are very widely spaced. And I think that alone makes it a much safer area for now until things start to grow back up again.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we want to model for the insurance companies, the difference between before and after.
But Alan, what I want to ask you is, you are made up of a group of insurance actuaries. Is there an insurance company or a group of companies who will consider these type of programs? Or is this just our hope and dream that we could put a program together that might attract someone to reduce their rates? Which is it?
Well, like I said, it's never been done before, but
Okay.
the people that are behind this feel really comfortable. What they're also trying to do, they're trying to get, and you may have heard this term before, community-based insurance. That's a term that's being bantered about recently, where, you know, communities will work with insurance companies to have insurance specific to that community. And so we're trying to help define that better and to, you know, bring the two things together, mitigation plus reduced risk, to show the insurance companies that, you know, it can be made better.
Zeke, is there anything you wanted to add to this discussion? I know you spend most of your working hours in this space.
I think the main thing is just that the campfire, it really was driven by long range spotting. You know, we had spot fires that were, you know, a mile or 2 miles ahead of the main fire. And so green belts and parks are, as a buffer, it's great if you have places for people to go to evacuate to, but it's not necessarily going to stop the fire that comes back that's like the campfire. And so we really have to think about, at the neighborhood scale, how to achieve similar things with the open space, even in your neighborhood. And one of the things that we saw during the campfire was just that the neighborhoods that had high density single homes, it was just fire spread from one house to the next. And so by clustering things into apartments, in some ways you have less exposure. Just because you have one, you can maintain the space around that one building, and you're not going to have another building that catches on fire necessarily that carries right to that one. So it's kind of the brave new world in this topic. It's just that we know that there's places up there that are critically bad and that we won't be able to vegetation manage our way out of. And so I think from a planning perspective, is how do we reduce the number of places where people are building in really bad lots, you know, dead end driveway at the end of a kind of draw. You know, there's some places that just are a nightmare as a firefighter. And it's kind of crazy to expect firefighters to even go into those places during a fire. So I think as a community, we have to look at those places and figure out, like, how do we buy out those people who have lots there that haven't rebuilt yet? And so I think looking at, you know, when we talk about subsidies, it's like, well, how can we just encourage people not to build new homes in bad places? Because once you build a home in a bad place, it'll never be a park, it'll never be an open space. So now that this initial crop of rebuilding has happened, and there's kind of a delay now because of building costs and everything else, it kind of buys us a little time to prioritize buying out the people who have lots in really bad places.
And I think part of that is also buying lots to connect dead end roads. Yeah, Zeke? I mean, I participated in the survey from the town a couple of months ago. Would you ever see this road or that road connected? And that's a very big thing, is to connect those roads.
Yeah, and so maybe the idea of even like a land bank, where if you have 2 acres and it's in a really bad place, how can we combine a lot of these parcels and re-subdivide portions of the ridge? Because right now the subdivision plan of the ridge, there was never any planning done around fire. People just subdivided, and that's why we have all these roads that don't connect and everything else. So I think when we think about how to rebuild a resilient community, that's part of it, is that, hey, there's some places where we need to not only abandon the lot, but we need to abandon the whole parcel map for maybe, you know, 200 acres somewhere, combine those parcels and get people new lots that are, you know, have a sewer and have water hookups and have roads that connect. But then we can't really rebuild the old footprint of the town and then expect that we can kind of come in and mitigate the hazards. Because the old town as built, there's hazards that are not mitigatable. There's lots that are too narrow to fit a chipper down the side of the house. There's places where you can't, if you cut a tree down, it's going to fall against, you know, across 3 other people's lots. And so I think that's part of this conversation, is like, okay, well, how can we erase those old parts of town And I know it's really difficult for people who have a connection to a place that they've lived before or to what was their neighborhood before. But especially if we're looking for subsidies, if we're looking for the public to pay for this kind of stuff, expecting the public to subsidize a future disaster it's kind of a tall ask. That's about all I have to say.
What you were just saying makes me think of kind of the inverse of the development impact fee. And if we have some kind of regulatory tool where subsidized projects, the subsidy is prioritized for those who are in the flat areas, well served by infrastructure, easier to evacuate, kind of trying to flip it to be more of an incentive instead of a punishment, perhaps.
I think the other big incentive is just to make people aware that the incentive is to not build your house again and lose it again. You know, so that everyone should be incentivized. And so part of it's an education process and saying, look, I know you want to go back and rebuild down in the hollow at the end of the dead end road, but it's really likely you'll lose your house again. And those are just these hard conversations that we have to have about the reality of the ridge. Is the reality is that we will have fires again. And that we can pay a lot of lip service to improving vegetation management and fire resilience, but when it comes down to it, it's this huge amount of work to cut brush, and Paradise grows brush better than just about anywhere in the world. And so there's a disconnect between talking about it and then it actually happening. But just because we want it to happen and imagine that it could happen doesn't mean that the millions of dollars it's going to take every year for perpetuity to make that happen is just going to keep coming.
Well, I had 100 goats across the street about 2 weeks ago, and the guys who were doing the goats actually put the fence in the wrong place. They were doing my neighbor's property, and they accidentally got half of my new lot that I bought across the street, and it is like totally denuded dirt. I mean, even the little oak trees that were growing up have no leaves on them. Those goats got everything. And I can't believe it would cost even $1 million a year to have 1,000 goats in herds of 50 cropping Paradise acre by acre every year. It would cost thousands, not millions. But anyway, I had a really good experience. They cut my property for free and I have no more room.
That's great.
I like your thinking, Chris. But yeah,
But don't let them near my wife's rose bushes because our neighbors have goats and they get under the fence and eat my wife's roses.
Yeah, and you know, Zeke, there are federal and state programs where some of that stuff can be implemented. But yeah, you're right. There's going to have to be maintenance for the long haul, and that's where you know, you have to start talking about bonding and taxing and you know, to build up a fund that's going to be able to maintain over time.
I just encourage people to listen with skepticism when someone tells you that it's just going to happen, that we're going to rebuild and it's going to be more resilient. I'd say, you know, ask them to show you the money because it's really expensive. It's a huge amount of work, and we just have to be realistic. And a lot of people who hope it's going to happen are speaking as if it's just going to happen because we hope it is, and it really isn't. But things like goats are great, and a lot of it, I think, you know, one of the big hangups with trying to use public money to do this work is then you have to do the environmental review. And so the more work that people can do at the neighborhood level on their own dime, you don't have to write CEQA, and you don't have to write NEPA, and you don't have to do archaeological surveys and all the things that make it really hard to spend public money to do this work. So the more we can come up with community-based solutions that use people's own labor and money to do the work, it's so much easier. Expecting a fire safe council to do it is a really inefficient way to get it done.
So I heard goats, and I also hear you, Zeke, that we need to think bigger picture and more holistically too about how we come back. But did want to move on to other strategies for managing and maintaining defensible space. Other ideas to put forward here? No? All right. I will
Are
go
you
on.
looking for answers to question 3?
Yeah,
Well, I mean, right now already the fire department is going around issuing citations or warnings. Many of my neighbors have gotten them. I've gotten a letter from the town saying my property meets the fire department specs, and thank you very much. So I think that's a #1 priority, is that we have a team, the fire department or the town or whoever it is, CAL FIRE goes around at property by property, lot by lot, and make sure that every owner is doing what he has to do to maintain all of our group defense. And if you don't do it, you get either a lien on your property, the town does it, they fine you back, but we have to do it as a group.
Problem with that, Chris, is that it's a very long process to force people to keep their property cleared. I have a lot across the street from me that about 6 months after the fire, somebody came through and cut down some trees, and that pile of logs has been sitting there. There's a forest of pokeweed at the back. I have reported the property repeatedly. They've sent people out to inspect it repeatedly. They've sent them warnings repeatedly, but there becomes a legal process, and they have to do everything they have to issue one citation and wait 30 days, and then another period of time, and then they have to enforce it. And a lot of these people have just moved away. They have no contact information available to anybody, and there's just nobody doing anything about it. And they need to start early in the spring, because by the time they come out and do those first inspections, there's already a small forest on the property. And by the time they go through those steps, now we're back into winter and it's raining again. So it's.
Yeah, I hear you, Vicky, and maybe what we need is more or better, faster acting bills on our or laws on our books that allows the town to act in a much faster method than 1 year, because that's inadequate. It's totally inadequate. So
I agree. I've talked to Kevin, the town manager, about it repeatedly, and he explains the whole process. And by the time you start it and finish it, you're talking a 6-month period of time.
Yeah.
That's if you can even find the owner.
yeah,
I've seen municipalities and towns in other parts of the country that when there's a property that is in violation of code, the town can go in and do what it's required to do by removing whatever needs to be removed, and then they put a lien on the property to be paid back by the property owner. And if they don't pay it back, then the property can be foreclosed in the future.
I think we have that. It just takes too long.
That's the problem. We do have that, but it has to go through the court system, and that's what draws it out. And it may just be a California thing, maybe a Butte County thing, but according to Kevin, there's really not much they can do to expedite the process.
Get some goats, Vicky, get some goats.
I would love to, but then you're trespassing on someone else's property.
No, the goats are trespassing.
a vigilante service of goats.
There we go. I don't know where those goats came from. They just showed up out there.
And give them some bulletproof vests so nobody shoots them.
Yeah.
Just stopping in to let folks know that we are at about 1 minute left, and I'll be closing the room. So finish up any last thoughts.
I'm gonna go to our last question. We'll just do popcorn style. Is there anything the town can do to support residents in extreme weather events related to heat and drought? This is something we're required to look at for that safety element. So I'll just go round robin if there's an idea, starting with you, Chris.
Heat and drought. I don't think we have the extremes that you would have in Reading or Chico that we need to put up, heat shelters. So I would say no. No.
Vicky, any ideas?
That's a tough one. We do, when we have PSPSs, we have like little community centers where people can come and use the power and things. I don't think it would be difficult to make facilities available with air conditioning. There are a lot of people living in RVs, and I was one of those people for 14 months through 2 summers. And the
All right, are we all back?
Looks
I'm
like
here.
people are coming along. It's almost everyone.
I hope you all had good discussions. My group certainly did. Thank you everyone for your participation. Alyssa, can I actually have you go through each note taker and we'll do a quick report back on some of the key things each group discussed. And actually we'll start with those of you at Town Hall. So Susan, for your group, any main points to share?
Thank you. Yes, so we had some great discussion about the density along Skyway and Clark. Talking about, probably at this juncture, most comfortable with 2-story developments and could see densities doubling with the current 15 unit per acre up to 30, at least, taking a look at that in that sewer district overlay. And just the discussions about the taller the buildings, the more people that are in the buildings, and still trying to be cognizant of having to move large amounts of people in short periods of time. And so just trying to be mindful of that. And that's kind of, how we're coming to some of these decisions about height and densities. And then also good discussion about the wildfire resiliency policies out there and supporting, and some good feedback also to consider, especially in terms of the wildfire impact fees and the potential it might have for helping with insurance costs, perhaps when you're part of a hazard mitigation program, things like that. And the parks and the green belts, definitely a lot of support there, and about ways for fuel management, whether that's through dedicated crews, volunteer groups, goats, things of that nature. And then some of the concerns, I think our biggest concerns are about seeing our weed abatement program be successful with so many out-of-town owners, and how do we get there, and making sure that we as a town are following through and making sure that these lots get cleared. So definitely still concerned about owners, walking away from their lots, and how can we get to a place where, people feel safe returning back to town and living here.
Thank you. Tabitha, how about your group?
Yeah, so we had some really good discussion concerning the increased density. There was greater support for single story, but support for higher density granted mix of uses, which also aids in safety and walkability, which we were in support for, and then some minor concern for traffic as the density increases, it's more people. And then in discussions around kind of fire resiliency and weed abatement, there was strong support for enforcement of defensible space, but maybe just concern over how much work it is, and who is going to be regulating that, and if it's on all of the homeowners to care for. And then there was also mention of the enforcing CAL FIRE standards of space between homes and structures, and just in rebuilding, being conscious of that. And then as far as building materials, we had some mention about variety of home types, but also concern that we are rebuilding in a sustainable way and in a more lasting way. So being conscious that as development standards can become a little bit more lenient to encourage rebuilding, then we're also being conscious of maintaining character for the town and lasting development. So some good feedback.
Thanks, Tabitha and Hannah in my group.
Sure. So for the first question regarding density along the Skyway, and the main corridors, we did have some concerns that 3 stories is very large for the region. Others had no problem with it as long as there is architectural control and they look nice. There was some preference to keep it at 2 stories, but again, if it was nicely landscaped and all that, it would be okay. Regarding parks and green belts as buffers, there was strong support for this. Someone also mentioned they would like to see the river edge even possibly be purchased by the state or the county to maintain it as a buffer and protect against fires coming down from the canyon. There was some slight reservation about the development impact fees. Folks would hate for it to prevent someone from building on the land, but it ultimately depends on how much it is. The only concern about increased requirements for setbacks or fire safe materials is what would happen to the homes that are already being rebuilt. And then there was a lot of enthusiasm for programs to facilitate home hardening and vegetation management. It'd be very good to help homeowners with this, especially for disabled folks or someone that doesn't have a lot of income to be able to do it themselves. And then in our discussion about maintaining adequate defensible space, someone mentioned it would be important to go lot by lot, make sure every owner is doing what they have to do to maintain the defense of the whole town, that it's really a group effort. However, others mentioned it is difficult for some owners to do this, especially some who aren't physically in town, and that it takes too long to get some people to do their tasks. So maybe we need faster acting laws that allow the town to act faster than 1 year. And then lastly, to support residents in extreme weather events related to heat and drought, someone mentioned or recommended that the community centers be made available or other facilities to use power and AC.
Thanks, Anna. We have one more live poll to just finally to gain some final feedback on which solutions people are most interested in. So once again, if you want to go to your internet browser or get your phone out, you can go one more slide, Tabitha, or actually 2 more slides. The housing solutions you heard tonight, which do you support? And you can select multiple here. We want to make sure the policies and programs that we put forward in the housing element are backed by the community. So curious what you think we should move forward with.
And let's just make sure, I know there were some people who had some technical difficulties. If you're still having an issue accessing the poll, please put up the raise hand reaction and I'll reach out to you.
And we'll also be distributing this after the event for people who weren't able to attend. So if you aren't able to troubleshoot it with Alyssa, there is another opportunity. So it looks like every solution has at least one person who supports it. So that's good. At least right now we're tied with increased density in the sewer service area and exploring funding and partnership opportunities for affordable and supportive housing, which just now edged forward to be number 1. And then when thinking about resiliency, last live poll question tonight, which of these solutions do you support? And once again, you can select multiple answers. Any last responses? Oh, still a little bit of movement. Once again, all the policies have at least a little bit of support. It looks like the strongest contender right now is for green belts or parks on key parcels, followed by increased fire resiliency requirements. Thank you everyone for weighing in. And like I said, we'll follow up to get a larger group of the community also to weigh in on this. Before we leave for tonight, and I know we're a little bit over, so I'll go through this quickly, but just want you to know what to anticipate. On our end, we're going to be working hard the next couple months to incorporate your feedback on the housing element and the safety element, and we'll be putting that out, published in November, and we have to get it approved by the state to make sure we're in compliance with state law by June, by the summer of 2022. So that's a high-level timeline. On your end, your next steps, should you choose to, are to, next slide, Tabitha, to take our exit survey to give us a little bit of feedback about what you liked tonight or what we could do better. And 2 lucky winners will win a $50 gift card to Nick's. So hopefully that piques your interest. You can also get signed up for updates. To do so, you can send us in the chat what your email address is. You could also sign up if you're in person at town hall. You can give your email address to the people there, or you can send me an email. Just let us know however works best for you. We'll be sending an email to everyone that attended, if you are willing to share us your email, to, like I said, have a version of the poll that you did tonight that's available to the rest of the public. And so please tell your friends and family. If you want to review the element when it comes out in November, we would love any feedback. And finally, you can check the town's website, and we'll put that in the chat. If you don't want us to flood your inbox, we wouldn't flood it. It would just be a couple updates. But if you don't want us in your inbox, that's another way to stay in touch. And with that, there's my contact info and Susan's contact info. Please be in touch if you have questions or comments. And thank you so much, everyone. If you do want to stick around to discuss some of the topics a little bit more, I know some of the breakout rooms got cut off a little early. You're welcome to do so, but we did want to wrap up for those of you that have to leave. So thank you, and I'll stay on. Looks like we have a lot of people that wanted to stick around. Thanks, everyone. Let's see what our final number is, and then we can figure out our best strategy.
Susan, could you also unmute again?
Yes, unmute.
Thank you.
Susan, how many people do you have that wanted to stick around?
Do you guys want to stay? Yeah, I still have 4 here.
Okay.
We have 5 participants on our end.
Should we go back into breakout rooms for those who are virtual, and then those who are in person can keep discussing too?
Yeah, we can do that. We still have, yeah, we have a couple that we weren't able to get to.
Okay.
We go back
And just make sure you hit record again, Susan, and stay off of mute. Thank you. So we can, I guess we do need to go in a breakout group, so we'll do that for it.
Give me one moment. I'm just going to add us all to a single large breakout group.
Perfect.
There we go.
So Tabitha and Leslie, what question did your group end at?
We got through them all.
Oh, okay. We were in the middle of talking about extreme weather, and I'm glad Vicky's still here because I think she was the one that actually got cut off when she was talking.
Yes, I was.
Do you want to finish your idea, Your thoughts?
Yes, I was one of those people who was living in my RV for 14 months, and that included 2 summers. Just got into my house in July of last year. But even with an air conditioner in there, and mine was a fairly new RV, inside the RV, it would be over 90 degrees inside with the AC running. And that is extremely miserable. And it's like setting a tin can out in the middle of the hot sun and not expecting it to blow up, kind of thing. And with most of us moved up here rather than Chico, I think a lot because it's typically anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees cooler up here. And with all the trees gone, it is just the opposite now. It almost feels like it's hotter up here than Chico sometimes. But I think that there needs to be something available for people, especially people who are living in RVs while they rebuild, to be able to get out of that heat. The winters are not as bad because you can always put more layers on, but in the summer you can only take so many layers off before you get arrested. And we need to have some options for people. And I know there's a lot of people out there who were going through the same thing, but they don't have the contacts available to be able to even find someplace to go. And they may not even have cell phone service and things like that. So I would love to see something like that for people to get through until most of us have rebuilt.
Yeah, and one thing I keep hearing from Leslie is if it can break 100 degrees in Portland for over a week, it can happen anywhere. So.
Oh yes, yes.
And Vicky, that study that I was talking about, the resiliency plan, is going to take those other things into consideration. And there's one other thing that's going to be taken into consideration, which wasn't mentioned tonight, which is flooding, which can happen in burn scar areas when you have heavy rains. So that's another thing that has to be looked at.
Yes, I remember there was concerns about that right after the fire because we got hit with a ton of rain that we could have used a couple of weeks earlier. That might have prevented some of that fire.
Yeah.
Any other ideas on extreme weather events and what the town can do to help? Zeke, are you raising your hand?
Yeah. Part of it, I think, is reimagining what Paradise, what the vegetation looks like. We've got the pine tree on all of the bumper stickers and the heart, the pine tree of the heart around it on the California map for Paradise. But the pine trees are really like the thing that took Paradise out, because they burn like crazy. And pine trees are also kind of a relic of fire suppression, where we have a lot more pine trees than we did before we started putting all the fires up, because the baby pine trees grow in thick mats and they get killed by fires. So I think if you go back and look at pictures from like 150 years ago, there were a lot of black oak trees there. And so part of that, when we imagine a future of Paradise, especially with climate change, that we shouldn't imagine that it's going to be a shady pine forest like it was before, but it could very well be a black oak forest. And black oak are good food for deer and turkeys, and even people eat acorns. People eat black oak for thousands of years. So part of this supporting people in heat and drought is creating an urban forest that's more fire safe and adapted to our future climate. And in a strategic way, let's work on restoring oaks in our parks. Black oak are a lot less flammable. So being kind of strategic in what we plant and where, but definitely thinking of the urban forest. The ridge is hot and gnarly right now just because we lost our urban forest. But we need to be really kind of deliberate in how we restore that. And part of that is like, don't encourage necessarily tree planting programs that plant a bunch of pine trees.
Mhm.
Zeke, is there a way that message could kind of get put out there for the residents? Because I know a lot of people who are purposely replacing their pine trees.
Yeah, I'm not sure who's the best lead on that. The Butte County RCD, the Resource Conservation District, was doing some work on that topic. I think, you know, it kind of happens at a community level too, with people in the garden clubs and talking to neighbors.
Okay.
The UC Cooperative Extension has some good resources around that. And their job, they're part of the University of California, and their job is to kind of help people with stuff like this.
Okay.
So I'll put an email in the link of someone you can talk to about this stuff.
Okay, thank you.
That also sounds like a promising policy for the housing or the safety element too, you know, an education
Yeah.
program on resilient landscaping.
Right.
Well, there is a lot of conversation about resilient landscaping, but so many of us don't really know what that means. You know, we all loved our lush yards we had before, and it's easy to say plant fire safe stuff, but we need to have a way to be educated on what exactly is fire safe, and we still want it to look good. We don't want to have cactus in the front yard next necessarily, even though that would be fire resistant, but it's not really something most of us want to have, and that's why we moved up here, is because we love the way it looked up here.
Yeah.
And thinking about how most people heard about the event tonight, it sounds like electronic sharing of, you know, just a simple, what is fire safe, or what are fire safe plantings, and trying to get that out on social media might be a good way to go forward.
Yeah, the Fire Safe Council has done a lot of work around that. So if you, they've got some good outreach programs, so you can get a hold of them. They should be able to connect you with good information.
There are also a lot of Facebook groups that popped up right after the fire. I run one of them, and anything that pretty much that the town puts on their Facebook page, it gets shared to my group. So the more things the town can put out that is information we can pass on, that will help get a lot of that education out there.
Great.
All right. Then our other question we didn't get to in our group is pretty broad, and we kind of covered it throughout, but just other ideas, policies, or programs or suggestions do you think we should consider as we try to meet our housing needs? I know it's a tall order, and that's kind of what our job is too, but just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything lingering out there that we don't know about. We definitely want to lift things up that might be stewing in the background for you. Okay, well then I'm going to ask for your reactions to one other thing we've been thinking about, and that is tiny homes. Those could be one solution to some of the construction costs if we have a tiny home village. Wanted to get reactions about that, since it is a new housing typology, and if there's any other policies or partnerships you want to put forward on other ideas to address construction costs.
I used to kind of object to the idea of tiny homes. I like the idea of having them be in little villages where they're limited we aren't going to worry about our neighbor putting in a tiny home across the street and bringing down property values. But I do like the idea of having neighborhoods that are exclusively that.
What about you, Alan? Are you still there?
I'm still there. I guess as long as they're fire safe constructed, it's a good affordable housing solution for some people. And depending on how they're built, they have to be in a village because they don't all have everything you need. Depending on how tiny they are.
So kind of like some shared space and
yeah, and community kitchen kind of thing, or stuff like that. I've seen that in some tiny home villages in other places. And there are a lot of other unconventional building methods coming along. There's a company out of Nevada called Boxable that they're building fire resistant modular units that ship really cheaply because they they basically fold up to an 8-foot by 12-foot box. That's hence the name. And they ship them on a truck, and you know, you can get a 450 square foot complete unit with sleeping area, dining area, kitchen, bathroom, for 50,000 delivered. And that was their goal. And they said they were gonna, they were just getting it up and running this past year, and they said they were gonna concentrate on California as their first market, but I haven't heard much lately about them. But there's just a lot of stuff like that going on. You know, different kinds of modular construction and different fire safe construction that's being considered, you know, by a lot of different people.
I know we do have some of those alternative building materials that are actually going in this area where they have, you know, all concrete and are all like kind of basically like cinder block kind of things. I've seen a couple of them go in on in the area that I'm at. I'm glad people are utilizing that kind of stuff, but some of us just, we like our conventional. I always think of things like, well, how do you put pictures on the wall if you've got concrete behind and things like that? So I'm maybe creating problems that don't really exist. I'm sure they've done something to solve that issue, but it is good to see some of those alternative things going. But I hear a lot of people saying fireproof, and I don't think there is anything that is actually fireproof out there right now.
Yeah,
Fire resistant, yes.
yeah. Habitat did some houses, and you know, they got the it's concrete in foam forms, and the foam forms, you know, you can run your electrical wires and all of that and on the inside, but then the interior of the house, they just have regular wood frame walls, but the entire exterior is, you know, pretty fire resistant. And then they put on fire resistant roofs with sprinkler systems and roof vents that don't allow embers to get in. So
Yeah, I think we all have had to put in the vents that don't allow the embers in. But I remember I evacuated in the 2008 campfire, and we put a sprinkler up on our house. And I remember twice coming back, and the fire department had turned them off because it was drawing too much pressure from them being able to fight what they might need to fight. So are rooftop sprinkler systems even allowed?
they were putting them in, and I thought it was a requirement.
No, the interior sprinklers, yes, but that's not to keep your house from burning. It's just to give you time to get out.
Right, right.
But I must have misunderstood. I thought you were talking about roofs that had exterior.
No, but the roofs were, I think they were, I don't know if they were tile roofs or metal roofs that they were putting on, but they were a different roof that was fire resistant.
Okay.
All right, so I heard Boxable as a potential company to check out, Habitat for Humanity as someone who is not in the traditional labor force that could help with the labor shortage maybe, alternative building materials, and it sounds like there's also support for tiny home villages. Anything else that you want captured?
I think the tiny home villages, you know, that could be a good fit in kind of trying to reimagine mobile home parks, because, you know, from a firefighter perspective, mobile home parks are pretty indefensible, and they're already zoned for high density, and they already have, you know, paved access and clustered utilities. So I think, you know, there could be some good ideas about how to kind of reimagine what a mobile home park looks like. How do you build something similar community-wise that's more fire resistant?
Thanks, Steve. Well, those are all of our questions. Alan, I have a question for you, and that's when will you learn about the grant? Do you know?
Well, the awards are made in December, and if we are lucky, we'll start in January.
Okay. So there might be a little bit of overlap when we are in the finalizing stage of our work. So maybe we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Any last words from anyone?
You know, I used to work for FEMA before I came to work for RCAC, and you know, one thing that we always stressed to people was, especially in a situation like this where you're building back from scratch, is that you have to take mitigation into consideration in any plan that you do, general plan, housing plan, anything that you're doing, including your zoning. And it's just paramount if you want to mitigate against the future risk.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you, Alan and Vicki. We really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you for all this.
Yes. Yes, thank you for making this venue available to us.
Absolutely. Have a good night, and we'll be in touch, hopefully.
Thank you.
Take care.
Everyone.
Alyssa, do you want to put us back in the main room?
Yeah,
Or-
I can, or you guys can definitely just leave this and go back to the main room. I was just in the other breakout room and they are still going, so I've just texted the city and let them know we're finished up.
Okay.
I'm not sure what they'd like to do, if they'd like us just to end the meeting and then they can continue in person. But I'm just gonna wait for a response or.
Okay.